Well, thank you for inviting me down here today.
Yeah.
I wanted to start, I just find it so curious, I mean, how you keep things in perspective, because obviously there's people all the time saying, I think the mayor should do X, Y, and Z. So how do you balance sort of what advice you take and maybe when you go off on your own? Or
Thank you for taking the time. First, if I weren't in this role, sitting at this table, and were analyzing externally without the benefit of having experienced the last several years, I may be saying a lot of the same things. I may be saying, why doesn't the mayor do X or Y or
Right.
Z? And the vast majority of the time, we either are doing X or Y and Z, or we have analyzed it and there's a really good reason we shouldn't go down that route. A lot of people will say, well, there must have been a lot of difficult, impossible decisions over the last several years, and the truth is the vast majority of them are fairly easy, or at least straightforward, but they're painful.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, if the individuals that you just referenced that are criticizing or have a take or an idea were sitting around this table getting a full and complete briefing, some of which is public information, some of which we can't talk about, but if they were to get the full and complete briefing and the recommendations that I get, the vast majority of them would agree full-heartedly with the direction that we're going because it's that clear. Most of the time, there are clear answers if you're listening to experts in data.
Right.
And so first, I ground myself not in not in the swirl of rhetoric that you hear externally, but in the information that you get that helps to lead you to a decision. Now, of course, you engage. I mean, there are a lot of decisions that aren't necessarily based on clear. There are decisions that go beyond data that require some form of like human interaction and engagement, and of course, you collect feedback.
What would be a good example of that?
Well, what does the memorial look like at George Floyd Square?
Yeah.
I mean, that is a more subjective determination that I should not be making. I believe that should come organically, or at the least through some sort of community engagement process from the community. Mm-hmm. And so that would be a great example. Now, there are more than a few other instances where, of course, public engagement is one point that you will take into account. But again, when you're briefed on the full, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned George Floyd Square. I mean, some people definitely feel like it's taken a really long time to get
count
to
me in there with them, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Do you think we'll get to an answer this year? Or?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
I do. Now, so on the one hand, I agree with them because it's been a source of frustration myself. Mm-hmm. I am with them in saying it's taking too long. And there is good progress that's being made. It's not necessarily progress that you see in the form of like a memorial going up at this moment. And just to point to some big progress, we're going to be going through street reconstruction. We've done a ton of work to get there, and that's going to be moving forward in the relatively near future. Additionally, we wanted to combine the work of the street reconstruction with the layout of the non-public right-of-way areas, mm-hmm. Some of which we now own.
Right.
And so we took a very intentional step, which has not taken place many times before, to buy the parcel itself. So we now have site control. That site control allows us and the community to dictate what it looks like going forward, and whether it's a healing center or a museum inclusive of a memorial, we now can dictate the future. We did not own it before. Now we do. And so that was a huge step.
Yeah.
that I'm pretty enthusiastic about. And yes, I would like to get to the recommendations and the vision by the end of this year. Now, does that mean that everything is going to be glossed and shined up and in complete construction form? No, it doesn't. But the vision and the recommendation, that's the goal.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, one of the things that I feel, and I'm sure you feel here in the city, is just like the country, a lot of times, like the political rhetoric seems as though people are just vehemently convinced that they know the answers, or they've
Yep.
just checked out of the political process altogether because they're kind of disgusted by it.
Yep.
And then, I've seen instances of doxing of people in your administration, and then I've also read about how yourself and some of the council members have in the past had to hire private security. So I'm just wondering, is this getting more common or worse, and how do we sort of change the discourse so that it isn't what sometimes feels somewhat dangerous?
It is, and you're right, and there is a problem in the civic discourse that has the heat of which, the vitriol of which has increased dramatically over the last 10 years that I've been in office.
Mm-hmm. What would you attribute that to?
I think you can attribute it to a bunch of different things, probably 100 different reasons, but just to name a few obvious ones. Social media is absolutely one of the causes. This whole concept of picking your friends, literally signing up friends, choosing what news sources to follow and what not to follow, and then having the ideas that you already have circulated in a
bubble.
Yeah, circulated in an opaque bubble, where you don't see out, nobody else can see in. Like, this is your bubble of human interaction, and in some cases not human interaction, literally. And you start to think that the whole world believes exactly what you do, and the whole world does not believe exactly what you think. Not to mention, it does push people to extremes. And we are seeing increased polarization right now. That increase is not only caused by social media, but it certainly is a big part of it. There's almost an incentive to be more vitriolic, to make the rhetoric even more nasty and mean-spirited. And there's less of an incentive to sit down and have face-to-face dialogue. When you do, I've seen people that have used those opportunities not for understanding or constructive criticism, but for another social media opportunity.
Right.
You get out the phone and you make somebody look bad. We've seen that again and again.
Yeah, I know.
Again, no respect I just don't have respect for that.
I've been to different community meetings here, and I've been surprised. Like one, Emily Koski brought Todd Barnett to a meeting to kind of introduce himself and talk, and I was just a little taken back by the fervor of people, and I almost thought, like, gosh, there needs to be security here. It was just really a lot. And I've heard others talk about, like, when they go to give feedback on things like George Floyd Square, that they felt shouted down by others, right? Like they haven't really gotten to give their opinions.
Yeah, very much. That is absolutely happening. And the way that protesting is conducted has shifted dramatically also over the last several years. I am a big First Amendment advocate. And your First Amendment rights stop at the next person's nose. You don't have the right to terrorize somebody.
Right.
You don't have the right to put yourself or others in dangerous circumstances. You don't have the right to spray paint, kill the mayor up on my wall. That's not First Amendment.
No. Yeah.
And we've seen this with elected officials, and regardless of the stripes or the ideology, it's unacceptable. Everybody needs to be saying that. I don't
Mhm.
care whether you support me or not. I don't care whether you support the city council or the president or anybody else or not. It's unacceptable. And again, everybody needs to be saying that clearly out loud, because it will dissuade talented people from running for these jobs, especially if they aren't willing to sign up without asking any questions to whatever the loudest group is saying.
If I recall, didn't you propose a city charter amendment for not necessarily having all of your appointed positions approved by the city council, and part of that was because you felt like it was a little hard to get people to want to go through that process of, I don't know, sort of a public
The public hearing process. Yeah. So that charter amendment did not move forward. We were trying to negotiate out with the council some agreement in the number of positions that would be appointed by me and confirmed by the council, or appointed by me subject to public hearing and confirmed by the council. And look, there is a necessity to have transparency in a process, and certainly there are positions at City Hall that are of a high enough level that require, I think, a vetting by the council. And yeah, there are more than a few really talented people that have been dissuaded by the fact that they've got to stand up in front of the dais and council members that could rip their entire lives apart.
Right.
And that's not my opinion, it's true.
Right.
There are people that have been very concerned about that, and for that reason have not said yes. And again, some of it is like, what's the underlying intention here?
Right.
Is the underlying intention to vet and to do good, or is the underlying intention to rip somebody apart or politicize the operation?
Right.
And one of them fair, the other not at all. And I've seen both.
Right.
I've seen both. I mean, but then you've got, I think you might have covered this, or at least we're asking questions about the doxing of, like Enrique.
Mm-hmm.
He's certainly not the only one that's gotten it, but completely garbage. That is completely garbage and unacceptable.
Yeah, I agree. So I came down here today from, South Minneapolis because I don't make it downtown very often these days. I used to be down here every day.
Yeah.
And I know this is an important issue for you. You brought it up in the state of the city. How does downtown change, or what do you think the future is if sort of people continue to work at home, or businesses aren't moving here? And then what are some of those incentives to get businesses to move down here?
First, downtown is going through a massive shift right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shift that's not unique to Minneapolis, but we're also not an exception to the rule. This whole concept of remote or distance or hybrid work was inevitable, but probably got expedited like 5 to 8 years by COVID-19. And with that expediting or expedition, whatever the term is, we got to shift a little fast. We got to shift faster than we thought we were going to have to. And that is a shift away from simply coming into work, at 8 a.m. and leaving at 5 p.m. to more of an entertainment locale. Downtown is more of a playground. And yes, we also need people to be working here. You mentioned, businesses. The businesses are still here. It's just that they're not bringing in their people as much as they did before. The people are working remotely. And a few months ago, I made a joke that clearly didn't land. Maybe it wasn't funny, but the underlying intention was very real. And because it is not a joke. I'll tell you what's not a joke. It's not a joke to have the devaluation of some of these buildings take place, and then residents to have to carry the burden. Some of these buildings will sell for 50 cents on the dollar for what they sold for just a few years ago, and that has an impact. And people say, "Oh, well, you're just worried about these corporate-owned buildings." No. in some cases, I don't even know specifically who they're owned by. That's not the issue. The issue is that if you take a small collection of these buildings, they generate more tax revenue than other wards in their entirety, sometimes. And that has a massive impact on the property taxpayer. I think in the next several years, we're going to need to look for new solutions for revenue generation, because a regressive property tax may not cut it in full.
So yes, revenue, obviously. Is there any, and I know you mentioned not wanting to make any layoffs or cuts, but is there sort of a process ongoing looking at ways to reduce city spending?
Yes. Yes, and a couple things. One, I didn't mention. I mean, people are they are continuing to come back downtown and increase numbers. I mean, virtually every week it's getting better. And so I imagine that we're going to get back to, let's say, and I'm making this up, 80% occupancy. But we're not going to get back to 100 using the model that we have had for decades. We're going to have to shift and change. And to your question, yes, actually just before this meeting, we had a series of budget meetings where we were talking about reducing the $21 million gap. Finding ways to, yes, efficiencies, maybe archaic programs that were useful 10 years ago and aren't anymore. Maybe a repurposing of staff positions where a position was utilized for one thing then, and either given the workload or the personnel specifically or the needs of today, we're going to need to find some efficiencies. That will happen too. Now, I stand by what I said about we're not looking at layoffs, because we're not. We have faith in our employees. Again, there may need to be some repurposing, but no, we're not looking at layoffs.
Okay. So one of the things that is obviously talked about a lot, and people have very strident opinions about, is the homeless encampments, and so, and I know that you were recently at this conference of mayors, homeless advocacy. So I just wanted to hear what maybe you learned at that. How does Minneapolis compare to how some of these other cities are handling the issue, and then if there's any sort of solutions on the table that maybe haven't been implemented yet, like the regulated camping areas or village of tiny homes, things of that nature.
Yep. So I could talk for an hour about this probably.
Yeah.
But I'll start by saying, when I came into office, we talked about dramatically increasing both the funding for and then production of affordable housing with a focus on deeply affordable housing. And you don't need to take my word for it. Look at the numbers. We're delivering. We're producing 8.5 times the amount of deeply affordable housing that we were before I took office. We're producing over 2 times the amount of affordable housing generally. And I can get you, definitions also as to what I mean by deeply affordable and regular affordable. But the production has gone dramatically up. Historically and traditionally, the areas that Minneapolis operates in with respect to homelessness is we again provide housing. We Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, we've invested in 5 times the amount, the previous record in that. We provide affordable housing, and we're doing that. We lead the nation in our work around affordable housing, and if you kind of pull yourselves out of the political narrative in Minneapolis and look nationwide, we're recognized as leading the way. Whether that's in supply that we have been generating, which has allowed rents to stay at around a 1% increase. Other cities have seen dramatic increases, or that's around the production of affordable homes. We're leading the way. And in the area of homelessness, we have in the past provided capital for the construction or acquisition for homeless shelters. But the social services piece piece, it's the county. The county is the social services provider. They, whereas we might, and I'm making these numbers up that I'm about to tell you, all the other numbers, accurate. These numbers, though, we might have a few outreach workers. The county has like 100 of them.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to duplicate the work that they are doing. They are the social services provider. They manage or run the shelter system. And the vast majority of the time, we have had shelter beds available. And so let's talk about homeless encampments. Not just comparing, but comparing favorably to what other cities are seeing is the truth, in that we saw a 25% reduction in unsheltered homelessness over the last couple of years, since 2020, I want to say. So a 25% reduction in the numbers. Other cities have seen a 90% increase in unsheltered homelessness. And I'm talking about the number of individuals.
I guess I look at what maybe I'm not looking at the right report, but I look at the report coming out from Hennepin County, and it looks like it's pretty much flat, like in terms of.
This is out of their report.
And, pardon?
This is out of their report.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get you those though.
But I mean,
that's unsheltered homelessness.
Right.
I'm not talking about.
In the
specifically
shelters.
talking about
Yeah.
unsheltered homelessness. So I'm sure you could be right, and I'm right. There could be other numbers that are largely flat, because what they have seen. I mean, there have been areas where they've seen a huge influx. They were somewhere in the range of, I think they're 400% over capacity in the area of like family shelters, for instance. And so
yeah,
it depends what numbers you're looking at, but specifically on homeless encampments. Again, it's not about a lack of shelter space. It's not. The strong majority of time we've had shelter space available, and it's been offered repeatedly. In some cases, it's not even. In many cases, it is about the lack of housing. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And the encampments, as we've seen, and this is not a position that is unique to me as mayor. I've talked to these other mayors about it also. They're not safe, either for the people living there or for the people in the surrounding neighborhoods. It is one of the most complex and difficult situations that we face, in that it is infused with addiction, and specifically fentanyl addiction, which is a drug that takes a hold of you like no drug that we've ever seen before. It's a drug that's relatively cheap, and so you can get it in readily available supply that you can find at the homeless encampments or around them. I think on the collective, governments collectively need to be doing a whole lot of work to provide compassionate care and addiction treatment, culturally sensitive treatment, mental health care, all these things. Now, Minneapolis can't do that alone.
Right.
We don't have the budget to get that kind of thing done. We're going to need help from the county and the state and the feds.
So yeah, I do get a little confused at times as to what the county is responsible for and what the city is responsible for, and I think there's some kind of joint task force working together, right?
Yeah. We have our team is working together with the county like every day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've got a team that is in place that's working with the county. Now again, traditionally, we've kind of done two things. In the recent years, we've been going beyond that. Traditionally, we've provided people with homes on one end, and we've done law enforcement on the other. And traditionally, that space in between, and I'm simplifying this quite a bit, but that space in between was largely social services that have been provided by the county.
Okay.
Now, in recent years, we've been doing more of that space in between. One example is like the Helix contract that we entered, that was successful in getting more people out of an encampment and into either stable housing or a shelter than we have before. But that's an example.
Well, let's move on to
And if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them too.
Okay.
About the about the homelessness or anything else.
Well, yeah. I mean, like you said, I mean, it's a big topic,
It is a big topic.
and I do have my questions about the Helix contract, but I want to make sure we get into
I'll give you a little extra time if you want to ask them about the Helix contract.
Well, it seems very unusual to me that they were given $1 million and there was like 2 people, and it's a for-profit company, and I looked at that and I really wondered, like, what we have this portfolio of nonprofits out there. It just didn't seem, it wasn't obvious why it would go to Helix, that money, that contract, as opposed to other more established nonprofits. And I also wonder, like, how are they making a profit? It's a for-profit company. So it just raised some red flags in my mind.
I stand by that decision. We were looking to get an approach that was culturally sensitive, with people that had deep understanding of the community that we were working to help. And I'm specifically talking about, yes, people experiencing homelessness and unsheltered homelessness, but also our American Indian community. And one of the big pieces was distinguishing between the people that wanted help, would benefit from the help, and would take the help, from the people that wouldn't. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they wouldn't benefit, I mean, they weren't taking it. And it was fairly successful in doing that. Now, does that mean that every single person that received a home was able to keep it? No. These are really difficult circumstances, and no matter who is doing it, you will see scenarios where a person enters the home and, because it's usually addiction, mm-hmm. isn't able to maintain it. And so that happens. And I mean, my big concern is, I have a concern, this is more globally than just with Helix, is we can't, I mean, look, there's a lot of room for both transparency and accountability that we need to appreciate and move on. And you can't, we have to, I am appreciative of the groups that are willing to step up into these really difficult areas to do this work, because many times we'll put out these bids and nobody responds or nobody wants to do it, at least because it's, again, some would see it as like, well, we're going to do good work, we're going to get people in, and then our whole nonprofit or business is going to get shut down because we get attacked.
Mm-hmm. So was that particular contract put out to bid?
I don't remember the procedure on that one, but we can certainly get you the information.
Okay. Are there any sort of changes in the works, or like in terms of, you mentioned like over here the
Can you make sure we get them that? Yeah, we'll get you whatever the answer is.
The the sort of the police response, and obviously that's a real flashpoint, the clearing of the encampments. Is that going to be the policy for the foreseeable future, or are there other alternatives being considered? Or?
So the goal is not clearance. The goal is to get people into homes,
right.
and to take shelter in homes. And to be very clear, we go out there, or the county does repeatedly, mm-hmm. to offer both of those things: service, care, treatment, shelter, homes. It's offered. And there are more than a few scenarios where sometimes the encampment's on private property, mm-hmm. In which case, in all cases we have a legal obligation. The homeless encampments are not authorized under code. And if it's on private property, it makes it even more of an issue, because you got a private property owner. And there are many instances when it's on private or public property but there is some form of safety hazard. Sometimes we can't even talk about it, you know? I mean, without giving specifics of where and which encampments and who, yeah, we've had a ton of situations where there has either been imminent gunfight that was going to happen, shootings, quite a bit of sex trafficking, specifically of minors and women. That has happened far too much, and just major problems, both damage to property and person in the surrounding area.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize, and I feel like.
And so you kind of have to. I mean, in certain situations, I guess the conclusion I'm getting to is, yes, you got to clear it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it an issue that continues to pop up? Yes, it is. It is.
Well, I think the council, I've seen that there might be proposals coming through for things like the regulated camping areas.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen them put anything out about like villages of tiny homes, but do you know if that's like a possibility, or is that, and I don't fully understand some of the camping ordinances that have been discussed.
Well, let me tell you what I'm kind of for and not for then, just to.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, tiny homes, great. I've been for that since I was on the council. We're all for that. Now, it's not as. This is one of those things where somebody's proposed X, Y, and Z, because I was literally one of those people that was saying, tiny homes, let's go, you know? Now, there are some practical logistics that make that hard. For instance, the whole concept is, well, you could print a tiny home for $20,000 or something like that. And you can print the tiny home, you put it up, and oh my gosh, we could put up 100 of these for no cost at all. Well, a little more to it. One, the land, and it's far more efficient to have multifamily dwelling units on a parcel than it is to have tiny homes, but that's not even the real issue. The issue is not the cost of putting up literally the structure. What about the water line? And digging underground to, is every one of the tiny homes going to have water and electric? Are you going to have a toilet in every one of them? Or are we going to have another place that has a toilet that's off to the side? You know, so these are questions that you got to analyze, and is that the most cost-effective and smart way of providing homes to people that need it? I'm all for the concept. I love it. But there are, you know, practical realities of how you actually set this up. So, and then, you know, regarding the council's potential homeless encampment ordinance, there's just a lot of questions.
Yeah.
You know, where's it going to be? Who's going to run it? How are you collecting liability? Who's providing security? Who's providing personnel and safety? Who's managing it? Who's operating it? How are you getting electric? I mean, because they're talking about. I mean, I oftentimes I've heard, well, you need to be providing not just porta potties, but porta potties and electric and
running
heat
water
to these encampments. Yeah. Okay, well, how are you doing that? I mean, if it's just going to be an electrical cord that's running through a bunch of open puddles to a house that's next door, that's not safe. You get a encampment that runs in that burns up, and so a lot of times there are these ideas that, again, if I was constituent whoever, I might also be saying, but we actually have to think about how to execute these things and what the repercussions or externalities of them will be.
I mean, there are some, and I appreciate that sort of practical thinking for sure. There are some examples around the country where they've kind of set up little villages just outside the city limits or in less populated areas to provide those services.
And I'm all for that.
Yeah.
You know, if we're saying, well, where to provide those services. Now, the question that I've been asking is like, we need to provide those services. We need to give people a place to stay and to go. The question I've been asking is, why not do all of those things inside? Same thing,
Yeah.
but inside. It's cold here. And when it's cold, you do need to plan for the logistics of keeping people warm. An easier way of keeping people warm when it is -20 out is having them inside. And that's the question that I keep asking, and I haven't, what's the answer to it?
Yeah.
And one of, I speculate that one of the reasons that, is like, when it's inside, there's a level of security that's provided, because anybody that is seeking to do something bad to the people that are in the building, they got to go in a certain door and out a certain door, and it's easier to secure. And there are some people that don't want that security.
So I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about, speaking of security, gun violence and the events of this week. And, it's a frustration for you, I'm sure, and everyone in the community to see like this pattern kind of repeating itself. So I just wanted to find out sort of what actions do you think will happen now after this unfortunate killing? Is it going to sort of change anything? And in kind of researching this, I saw that, Ryback dealt with this 12 years ago.
Sharon before him and Don before her, and yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, like, what happens now? What changes?
We have too many guns in this country, and we have too many guns that are coming into the city by the trunkload, both legal and illegal guns coming into the city by the trunkload, sometimes literally by the trunkload. And
where do you think they come from? I mean, I've heard like Chicago. I mean, but I really have no idea.
Yeah, that's one of the area. It's all over, but yes, it's very easy to get a gun, and when you have more guns than you do people in the country, and you can, it's sometimes easier to get a gun on the street, in some of these neighborhoods that are struggling with crime than it is. I mean, I don't want to say easy.
They're readily available.
Readily available.
Yeah.
Readily available, and so and that is a massive problem. Now, our police have been doing great work in getting guns off the streets. The last, I want to say last year, and I believe this year as well, we're seeing record numbers of guns. Our police officers get record numbers of guns off the street, which is a good thing. We should be proud of them for that. But the other side is that if they're getting record guns off the street, then there are record guns on the street to begin with, which is a huge issue. And so to start with where you started with, well, some people would say, well, if you just did a gun buyback program. We've seen this done time and again, where you do a gun buyback program, and maybe it makes for a good photo op, and you take all the guns in, and you melt the guns down, and you put some statue up with the melted guns. I mean, what we've seen traditionally is you're not doing much more than subsidizing the gun makers, because more guns will come in. That is not a thing that has been worth the while in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I throw gun buybacks in sort of. It's one thing to try.
It's one
right
thing. Now there's a lot of. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I mean I don't. I've written about gun buybacks, and people have been very critical of that. But I see it as, and I don't. The evidence I've seen, it's the whether they're effective or helpful at all is still kind of up in the air. I mean, in my sort of simplistic way of thinking, it's like it can't hurt, right, to get guns off the street. But
and we've done it before, both during my time and before. I'm just saying it's not going to change the game.
No,
it's not going to. This issue that you mentioned, RT and Sharon, it's not going to change the game. We've all tried the gun buybacks, and we still got too many guns. There are laws that need to change around how guns are both purchased and sold. Now, I'm pretty hard line on, you know, I think we should have far less access to guns in terms of the legislation that I would want to see passed. And
can I
yeah,
jump in
please.
there? I mean, I know the state legislators ended its year. It seems like, you know, it's possible that would change over to Republican, who knows? So is it really a possibility at all of getting any sort of laws in Minnesota that would make it tougher to buy and sell guns? And
It's always a possibility. It's the political will to do it. So yes, it is a possibility. And I mean, I used to be the PAC chair of Protect Minnesota, which is the anti-gun violence group. And we've been working on this for a while. I mean, a lot of this needs to come from the feds too, I believe. You can look at other countries that have gone through mass shootings and they have made fairly quick changes that have seen pretty substantial benefit, and other countries don't have the same rates of gun violence that we do, not anywhere close. So there are policy things that we can do around this, and we should be.
will you be reaching out to federal officials or any other channels after this to try and change things?
It won't be the first time I've reached out on it. And
right.
So will I reach out to reiterate a position that I've already held and inform them of? Yeah, I will. And most of them are on the same page, you know, the ones that I would reach out to that represent me and that represent the city. You know, it's a much bigger question that goes beyond that too, though. And so, but yes, the answer is yes. Yeah, we're gonna head out in a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And we've got programs, you know, we've got all sorts of programs, intelligence that we're gathering, technology that we're using in ways never before to track guns and to get them off the street. You know, programs that, you know, track the supply of technology, I should say, that tracks the supply of guns. Intelligence where that I won't get into too deeply, but where we're tracking groups or gangs and people that are that are using the guns to hurt people. And so yeah, there are some things that we're doing that are really successful, like I said, that has resulted in record number of guns getting off the streets, even with a diminished force. So they're doing great work, but we still need to do more.
Do you have sort of a prediction of the fate of the union contract with the MPD at this point?
I won't give you a prediction. I will tell you it's a good contract. I am hopeful that the police union approves it. That's the first piece that needs to happen in the very near future. And then after that, I am hopeful that the council will approve it. It's got good reforms in it, and it's got a deserved pay increase, both of which are necessary.
Okay. Well,
something that I'll just to sort of set the context, because people often get confused on this, is a lot of people want to see certain things. Say, well, why isn't this in the contract or that in the contract? The important thing to remember is that you don't want to negotiate things in the contract that you don't need to negotiate, and you can just do unilaterally. The goal generally of management in any of these contracts is we keep, especially, you know, and in police contracts, is we want to keep things as much as possible under management authority. And so if you the more you put in the contract, the more you're giving the union the ability to negotiate something that we may be able to determine ourselves. You know, so if some people say, well, why don't you put the discipline matrix in the contract? I said, why? We have a discipline matrix. We wrote the discipline matrix. We didn't ask for permission or approval. We did it. Why would you put that in the contract? Doesn't make any sense. And so sometimes people get confused about what is a topic of the contract and not.
Right. And then I wanted to see, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't get a chance to bring up today? Any other?
I'm sure there's 15 things that I didn't talk about, but no, so you hit a lot of stuff there. You hit a lot of stuff, and I appreciate the work you're doing and the time you give. And I think the way you started off the interview is exactly right. You know, there is a lot of information and positions that swirl out there, and a lot of times the positions seem, well, why not?
Mm-hmm.
It's a fair question to ask. And some of that is perhaps a result of we just got to communicate better and more often. We try. And some of it is it's just this stuff is complex. And some of it is we can't share the information for legal reasons that we'd
Right.
love to.
Well, I definitely think people will appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah,
today.
thank you, Terry. Appreciate you. Yeah. Got to head over